Have you ever wondered why God allowed you to suffer before lifting you up? Why He let you walk through seasons that felt unbearable, unfair, and completely out of your control? This question sits quietly inside the hearts of those who have faced storms that seemed too heavy, battles that felt too constant, and nights where the silence of heaven felt louder than your prayers. And yet, in those very moments of breaking, something sacred was unfolding. Because suffering is never random. Pain is never wasted. And the God who allowed the valley is the same God preparing the mountain you are about to climb. There are moments in life when the pressure increases, the weight intensifies, and everything you relied on begins to collapse. These moments feel like abandonment, but spiritually they are alignment. God often lets suffering touch you, not to destroy you, but to strip away what could not go with you into the next season. Before elevation comes separation. Before purpose comes pruning. And before God lifts you up, He refines you through experiences that expose what is fragile so He can strengthen what is eternal. Your suffering was not a sentence, it was a setup, a divine preparation disguised as pain. Maybe you felt ignored, overlooked, or even forgotten, but what if the suffering you endured was the very environment where God shaped your endurance, sharpened your discernment, and purified your intentions? What if the tears you cried were watering the very ground of the destiny you're about to step into? People see the elevation, but heaven sees the breaking that made it possible. And the God who allowed the suffering was also guarding your spirit, molding your character, and preparing your heart for what He always planned to place in your hands. And before we continue deeper into this journey of revelation, let me ask you something that may stir your soul. Have you ever felt like your suffering was preparing you for something bigger than you realized? If this awakening feels familiar, share your experience in the comments, because your story might be the key someone else needs. And if this message is already speaking to you, remember to like the video and check if you're subscribed so you don't miss what God is unfolding next, as we move into the next part that begins to reveal the hidden design behind your pain. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when God goes silent, and that silence feels heavier than the suffering itself. You pray, yet nothing shifts. You seek answers, but heaven seems still. You look for signs, but all you see is the same valley stretching out before you. It is in this quiet, almost suffocating absence that many people believe God has turned away. But what if His silence was not abandonment but strategy? What if silence was the furnace where He forges the version of you that can carry the weight of the elevation He has prepared? Silence has a way of exposing the voices you used to depend on. When people stop applauding, when support fades, when comfort is stripped away, you begin to hear the deeper layers of your own soul. It is there, in the sacred quiet, that God teaches you to separate emotion from revelation, pain from purpose, fear from truth. His silence becomes the chiseling tool that shapes your inner foundation. Because before God lifts you, He ensures your stability isn't built on noise, approval, or external reassurance, but on a faith that survives the dark. This is why seasons of silence feel so uncomfortable. They force you inward. They pull you into spaces where your spirit confronts questions you never dared to ask. Why did this happen? Why now? How do I move forward when nothing feels secure? And while you wrestle with these questions, God is rewriting the architecture of your heart. He is strengthening your endurance, deepening your roots, and stretching your capacity to trust beyond what is visible. Silence becomes a construction site disguised as stillness. Many people misinterpret divine silence as a lack of movement, but heaven often does its greatest work behind the scenes. Just as a seed breaks beneath the soil long before it rises into the light, your transformation began long before you could see any evidence of change. God was aligning circumstances, redirecting paths, closing wrong doors, and preparing unseen opportunities even while you felt suspended in waiting. His silence was never a pause. It was preparation layered in purpose, and perhaps the most powerful truth is this: silence trains your spirit to recognize God even when He whispers. It is easy to follow Him when the signs are loud and clear, when the path is well lit, when the blessings are visible. But those who learn to trust Him in silence become unshakable. They rise with a faith that isn't dependent on feelings, a strength not rooted in comfort, and a discernment sharpened by stillness. Because the God who seemed silent was actually drawing you closer, teaching you to hear Him beyond the noise, preparing you for what comes next as the journey unfolds with new clarity. There is a point in every season of suffering where the real battle shifts from what is happening around you to what is happening within you. The external pressure pushes you inward, forcing you to confront questions of identity, purpose, and faith that you never had to wrestle with before. It is in this internal battlefield that God reveals one of the deepest truths of spiritual growth. Trials are not designed only to test you, they are designed to reveal you. They uncover who you are when everything familiar is stripped away, and in that revelation, God begins shaping who you are meant to become. Suffering has a way of shaking loose every false identity you've built. The version of you that relied on control, the version that depended on approval, the version that felt secure only when life followed your expectations, those versions cannot survive the weight of divine purpose. So when trials intensify, the shaking is not punishment, but purification. God allows circumstances to remove layers you didn't even know were holding you back. You discover fears you never faced, wounds you never healed, strengths you never recognized, and faith you never knew you had. The storm that feels like it is breaking you is often the storm that is revealing the real you. This is why suffering and identity are so closely intertwined. You cannot fully understand who you are in God until life forces you to let go of the identities shaped by people, by pressure, or by past experiences. Trials interrupt your expectations so God can rewrite your foundation. They push you past the surface into the deep places where your true beliefs, motives, and desires live. And in that depth, God begins to refine you, not by removing the storm, but by strengthening your spirit to stand within it. Faith, in its purest form, is born here, not in the moments where everything makes sense, but in the moments where nothing does. It is in confusion that trust is stretched. It is in disappointment that faith is tested. It is in delay that character is formed. And even when you feel weakened by what you are enduring, heaven sees something different, a spirit being fortified, an identity being clarified, a purpose being awakened. The pressure that threatened to crush you becomes the tool God uses to mold you into someone who can carry the weight of the blessing ahead. And as these internal battles unfold, something else begins to emerge. An identity no longer built on circumstances, but anchored in resilience, clarity, and divine truth. You start to recognize that your suffering was never meant to define you. It was meant to refine you. And as this refinement continues, it quietly prepares the path for the revelations that follow, shifting the journey toward deeper understanding as the unfolding purpose behind your pain begins to take shape. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when loss forces you to confront what comfort never could. A relationship ends, a door closes, an opportunity disappears, a season you depended on suddenly shifts. And in those moments, the pain feels personal, sharp, and unfair. Yet what if the very losses that wounded you were the tools God used to guide you away from paths that would have silently sabotaged your future? What if every ending you grieved was actually a beginning wrapped in disguise? Loss has a strange way of clearing the horizon. While comfort keeps you rooted in what is familiar, loss forces you to lift your eyes toward what lies ahead. The things you once clung to so tightly now slip through your fingers, not because God is punishing you, but because He refuses to let you settle for a life beneath your calling. Sometimes the removal feels cruel, but heaven sees the bondage you could not see. God knows when a path will drain you, distract you, or damage the purpose He placed within you, and in His mercy He interrupts what you thought would last. Many of the losses you endured were not failures, they were interventions. People left because they could not walk with the version of you God is shaping. Plans collapsed because they would have limited the growth God intended. Opportunities faded because they were too small for where He was taking you. And while you stood in the middle of the wreckage asking why, God was already rebuilding a future aligned with His design, not your comfort. Loss also confronts the illusions we build, illusions of control, of permanence, of certainty. When those illusions fall apart, your soul becomes more attentive, more surrendered, more open to divine redirection. Your plans may have broken, but your spirit began to bend towards something higher. And slowly, almost quietly, you start to realize that the things God removed were never meant to anchor you. They were temporary landmarks on a journey far bigger than you could see. It is often after loss that clarity emerges. You begin noticing how God protected you by denying what you once begged for. You start understanding that some connections were seasonal, some opportunities were distractions, and some desires were never meant to go with you into the calling that awaits. This awareness reshapes your perspective and gives new meaning to every tear you shed. And as the path continues to unfold, loss becomes less of an ending and more of a doorway, one that leads into the next phase of transformation, purpose, and divine alignment. And before we move deeper into this unfolding revelation, take a moment to reflect on your own journey and share in the comments how a loss once redirected your life. Because your story may give someone else the clarity they've been praying for. Long before God lifts you up publicly, He strengthens you privately. And one of the most powerful yet overlooked ways He prepares you is through the battles no one else sees. The struggles of the mind, the conflicts of the heart, the spiritual tension that rises when your outer life seems unchanged, but your inner world is being reshaped. These hidden battles can feel exhausting, confusing, and at times overwhelming, yet they serve a divine purpose. They refine the very foundation on which your elevation will stand. Inner battles reveal what external circumstances cannot. They expose the fears you've carried for years, the doubts buried beneath your confidence, the insecurities you learn to hide behind competence, and the wounds you thought you healed simply because you stopped talking about them. When God allows these internal storms to rise, it is never to shame you, but to strengthen you. What is brought to the surface can finally be surrendered. What is revealed can finally be rebuilt, and what you confront in private becomes the proof of who you are becoming in the hands of God. These battles are necessary because elevation demands maturity. You cannot step into a greater calling while carrying an unsteady spirit. You cannot lead others while wrestling with the same chains God is trying to break in you. So He allows seasons where old patterns resurface, not to condemn you, but to show you what can no longer travel with you. He brings unfamiliar pressure to familiar places in your heart, forcing you to choose growth over comfort, transformation over repetition. You may feel stretched, unsettled, or even torn between who you were and who you are becoming. This tension is evidence that God is working. He is enlarging your capacity, expanding your resilience, sharpening your spiritual instincts. The battles you are fighting now are developing disciplines, clarity, and strength you will need for the places He is preparing to take you. What feels like inner chaos is often the rearranging of your spiritual architecture. And though these struggles feel hidden, heaven sees every moment. Not a single tear, thought, or step of progress goes unnoticed. In fact, these private victories create the spiritual credibility required for public assignment. The strength you build here becomes the anchor for the seasons where God elevates you beyond what you once believed possible. And as this internal refining deepens, the journey naturally shifts toward a deeper purifying work that God continues as He prepares you for what comes next, allowing the unfolding revelation to move forward with growing clarity and purpose. Before God elevates a person, He purifies them. Not in the superficial ways people often imagine, but in the deep, hidden chambers of the soul where motives are shaped, intentions are tested, and desires are refined. This purification rarely feels gentle. It comes through pressure, discomfort, and moments that expose the parts of you that still need surrender. And yet, this process is not meant to break you. It is meant to cleanse you so you can rise without carrying the weights that once held you down. There are seasons when God begins removing things you thought you needed, habits that once soothed you, relationships that once comforted you, goals that once excited you. Suddenly, they no longer fit, no longer satisfy, no longer align with the person you are becoming. This isn't confusion. It's purification. God strips away attachments that would contaminate the future He has prepared. Elevation requires a soul free of entanglements, distractions, and double-mindedness. Promotion is not just a change of position. It is a change of purity. Purification also reveals what your heart truly trusts. When God removes the supports you once leaned on, you learn quickly whether your faith rests in His hands or in your own strength. You discover where pride was hiding, where fear was living, and where self-reliance was blocking the flow of divine guidance. These revelations sting, but they are sacred. They are the spiritual surgery that clears away what would sabotage your next season if left untouched. And this purification does not happen only through loss. It happens through pressure. Sometimes God allows circumstances that squeeze you, not to crush you, but to expose what rises to the surface when life becomes heavy. Frustration, impatience, discouragement, anger. These are not signs of failure, but indicators of what God is healing. He purifies by bringing buried emotions to light so they can be transformed into strength, patience, wisdom, and spiritual clarity. As this refining continues, something profound begins to shift within you. Your desires become simpler, your intentions become purer, and your dependence on God grows deeper. You stop chasing recognition and begin craving alignment. You stop seeking validation and start seeking truth. Things that once mattered lose their grip, and things you once overlooked begin to carry eternal weight. This is the quiet evidence that purification is working. Your soul begins to crave what heaven values. And though this process feels heavy, it is also holy. It prepares you to carry influence without corruption, authority without arrogance, and blessings without losing yourself. The purification becomes the unseen foundation of your future elevation, shaping you into someone capable of walking confidently into the calling waiting just ahead, as the journey continues unfolding toward the next transformative stage. There is a phase in your journey with God that feels strangely familiar, yet entirely different, a moment where the pressure rises again, the challenges intensify, and the path seems to narrow just when you thought relief was near. This final stretch is not punishment, it is a proving ground. Before God lifts you into a higher season, He allows a final test of spiritual maturity to surface, not to expose weakness, but to reveal how deeply you have grown. It is the moment where God checks not your perfection, but your readiness. This stage often arrives when you least expect it. After enduring seasons of loss, silence, inner battles, and purification, you anticipate peace. Yet instead, God brings you to a place where what you learned must now be lived. Old triggers may reappear, but your responses are no longer the same. Situations that once intimidated you now meet a quieter strength. The instability that once shook your faith now finds you anchored in a deeper understanding of who God is. This is the evidence of transformation happening beneath the surface. What makes this phase so challenging is that it feels like repetition. You may wonder why similar obstacles come back, why familiar emotions rise again, or why doors that should be open still hesitate to move. But repetition is not regression, it is reinforcement. God highlights these patterns so you can walk through them with a new identity instead of old fears. He allows these echoes of past battles because this time you are not fighting as the person you were. You are fighting as the person you have become. This final testing also sharpens your discernment. As God prepares to elevate you, He ensures your decisions align with your calling rather than your comfort. You begin to notice how distractions lose their appeal, how opportunities that once excited you now feel misaligned, and how the voice of God grows clearer while the noise of the world fades. This internal clarity is a sign that you are nearing the transition. Elevation requires a spirit that can recognize the difference between what is good and what is God. And in this stage, God is not watching to see if you fall. He is watching to see if you rise differently. He looks at how you handle disappointment, how you steward your emotions, how you maintain integrity when no one is watching. These subtle decisions reveal the maturity needed for what He is about to release. Your breakthrough depends not on perfection, but on the posture of your heart as you stand in this final stretch of preparation. And as this refining moment unfolds, take a breath and reflect on how far God has brought you. Share in the comments what lesson from your journey has shaped you the most, because your insight may be the encouragement someone else needs as they face their own final test before breakthrough. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when the fog begins to lift and the pieces of your past pain start aligning with a clarity you never had before. It does not arrive suddenly or loudly, it unfolds gradually, as if God begins illuminating your story from a new angle. The struggles that once felt meaningless take on unexpected significance. The doors that closed now reveal the protection behind them. The delays that frustrated you begin to show their wisdom. It is in this calm after the storm that revelation steps forward, not as an explanation, but as understanding shaped through experience. What makes this stage so transformative is that you begin to see your suffering from the other side. You start recognizing how each hardship prepared you in ways comfort never could. You notice the strength that grew without your awareness, the resilience formed in silence, the discernment sharpened through disappointment. You begin to realize that God was not ignoring your pain. He was guiding you through a path that required refinement before reward. And slowly, a quiet gratitude emerges, not for the suffering itself, but for what it produced within you. This revelation also brings a new awareness of timing. You understand why certain relationships had to end when they did, why certain dreams needed to crumble before others could rise, why certain opportunities remained out of reach. These moments that once felt like barriers now appear as strategic redirections. God never wasted a season. He never let you walk through darkness without shaping something essential inside you. The very moments you questioned the most become the ones that explain the journey with the greatest depth. you also begin to sense how God was aligning your steps in ways you could not see. Conversations that seemed insignificant now reveal themselves as pivotal. Encounters that appeared random become threads in a divine pattern. Even the prayers you thought went unanswered begin to show their fulfillment in unexpected forms. This is the phase where heaven's orchestration becomes visible, and you realize that God had been far more active in your story than you ever imagined. As understanding deepens, your heart shifts from asking why you suffered to recognizing what the suffering made possible. You see how your capacity to love, forgive, endure, and discern expanded. You notice how your priorities changed, how your perspective softened, how your faith matured. These internal shifts become the quiet evidence that God was not only preparing a blessing for you, He was preparing you for the blessing. And as this layer of revelation settles into your spirit, the journey naturally moves toward an even deeper unfolding where the authority shaped in your struggles becomes the foundation of something greater that God is preparing to reveal next. There is a kind of authority that cannot be taught, borrowed, or inherited. It is forged only through what you have survived. The battles you fought in private, the wounds you carried in silence, the disappointments that threatened to break you, the seasons where you had nothing left but faith. These experiences shape a spiritual authority that cannot be imitated. It does not come from titles, achievements, or recognition. It comes from endurance, from resilience, from knowing firsthand who God is when everything else collapses. When you walk through suffering and come out transformed rather than destroyed, something shifts within you. Your voice gains weight. Your presence carries depth. Your words resonate differently because they were birthed in places where only God could sustain you. People can sense when you speak from theory versus when you speak from testimony. Pain refines your spirit into someone who not only knows the promises of God, but has lived through the fires where those promises were tested and proven true. This is why God often allows chosen individuals to walk through harder paths, not because they are forgotten, but because they are being prepared to carry influence that requires authenticity. Your scars become evidence that healing is possible. Your perseverance becomes a roadmap for those who feel hopeless. Your journey becomes a living message far more powerful than anything you could say without having lived it. God uses your experiences to give you a voice that carries compassion, wisdom, and spiritual credibility. Authority shaped through suffering also sharpens your discernment. You begin to recognize emotional traps you once fell into. You see through manipulation, confusion, and distractions that once entangled you. Your spirit becomes less reactive and more anchored. You no longer chase validation or fear rejection in the same way because your identity is no longer built on fragile foundations. This inner security becomes a sign that what once wounded you now strengthens you. And as you continue walking forward, you realize that the battles you overcame have equipped you for something greater than survival. They have equipped you to lead, to guide, to uplift, to speak life into others who are walking through valleys you once knew intimately. Your pain becomes a platform not for attention, but for purpose. And what once made you feel unqualified becomes the very thing God uses to qualify you. This emerging authority is not loud or forceful. It is steady, quiet, unshakable. It is the kind of strength that makes others feel safe in your presence, the kind of wisdom that helps them trust the process they are facing, the kind of authenticity that draws them closer to God rather than to you. And as this authority settles into your spirit, the path opens toward what God has been preparing from the beginning, a season where elevation meets purpose and where the culmination of your journey begins to take form as the next chapter unfolds. There comes a moment, often quiet and unexpectedly gentle, when the long season of breaking, refining, waiting, and maturing gives way to something new. You do not always notice it immediately. Sometimes it begins with a shift in your spirit, a clarity in your thoughts, a renewed sense of direction, or an inner strength that feels unfamiliar in the best way. It is the moment when God begins lifting you, not as a sudden event, but as the natural unfolding of everything He has been shaping within you. Elevation is rarely explosive. It is often the steady rising of someone who has been deeply prepared. As you step into this new chapter, you begin to recognize the subtle signs of God's hand. Opportunities align more naturally. Conversations open doors you once thought were sealed. Peace follows decisions that once felt impossible. What used to drain you no longer holds power, and what once intimidated you now meets a steadiness developed through your journey. This is not coincidence. This is the quiet confirmation that God's timing has arrived, and the season that once felt unending has finally shifted. What makes this stage so profound is not just the blessing itself, but the version of you that is receiving it. You are no longer moving from fear, but from wisdom, no longer from desperation, but from clarity, no longer seeking validation, but walking in purpose. God lifts you not simply because your circumstances changed, but because you changed. The person who stands here is not the same person who began this journey. You carry the depth of someone who has been shaped, tested, and strengthened by experiences that have anchored your faith beyond emotion or convenience. As this elevation unfolds, you begin to see how intentionally God orchestrated every moment that led here, the losses that redirected you, the silence that matured you, the trials that revealed you, the inner battles that fortified you, the purification that prepared you. Each piece becomes part of a mosaic that only makes sense from this vantage point. And though the journey was long, the rise feels natural, almost inevitable, because it is the fulfillment of a process heaven authored long before you understood it. And now, as we reach this point in the message, if this journey has resonated with your spirit, let your presence be felt. Leave. A comment saying something like this message was for me, not just as engagement, but as a declaration of what God is awakening in you. If the words you heard today brought clarity or strength, consider subscribing to the channel so you can continue receiving messages that walk with you through every stage of your spiritual growth. And if this chapter spoke life into you, a simple like helps this message reach others who may need it just as much. There is a video right here that continues this conversation in a way that can deepen everything you're feeling now. Click and keep walking with me as your next step unfolds.